Hello everyone, how are you doing? I'm so proud of you guys because you have been faithful to study the Bible for last more than 9 months, and you guys really dedicate your life and self to know Him and to make Him known in your life. So I'm so proud of you guys, and the graduation is just around the corner. So you're almost there and you're almost finished. So I highly want to encourage you guys to not give up and keep going and keep studying. And I just really want to remind you guys that this is not the finish. This is just beginning point of your studying the Bible. So yeah, do not give up to study Bible because you finish SBS. You have to push yourself more, and you have to be there to study his Bible and also just teach the Bible. That's the purpose of why you studying Bible for last 9 months, actually no more than 9 months, and why you just train in this the inductive Bible study way. So guys, please do not give up and do not stop to study Bible and do not close the Bible and keep going it. And actually that's the message of the episode of John also, because as you guys might already study and read this Bible, and you can see that there's a really big message in this letter. Even this letter is the kind of the small and simple, looks like a simple, but the message is not that simple. So it's a small letter, but the message is not small and message is not simple. So that's why we need to study it. We need to dedicate ourselves to know Him and to make Him known. And even this small letter can teach us and can lead our life to know Him more. And also, we can use this letter to teach other people. So, there's no Bible verse that discourages us from studying the Bible. So, that's why we have been studying the Bible for last 9 months. So, again, I'm so proud of you guys. And yeah, just pro yourself and dedicate yourself more to know Him in your future life, because this is not the end, this is not the finish. Also, if you study, and some of you guys already maybe just study already, then you know that the letter is consists of the two main themes. The one theme is the theology, and the other theme is the practice. So this letter, small letter, is talking about the theology of the gospel and also the practice of the gospel. And in other words, this letter is talking about the theology of the Jesus, also is talking about the practice of Jesus. So theology and practice, and theory and practice is really well balanced. And yeah, so that's why this book is not only about the theological book, but this letter is also a very practical book. So if you really study this letter, you'll come to know how we can live out this gospel, how can live out this Bible. You can realize it. So this letter is really great letter, even the size is small. So theology is talking about what is truth in this letter, and also the author of this letter is talking about how we know the truth, the practice. Theology. So this letter, it can be called by a letter of apologetics, especially the First John, because it's depending the truth of Jesus Christ. It's depending the gospel of Jesus Christ. So you can see that. And also, this letter is talking about practice, and especially how can we or how can I live in this world as Christian? Because our life is not that simple, especially the Christian life is not that simple. It's very challenging, and it's very complex. I don't like the word complex, but that's truth. Our life is complicated and complex. It's not that simple, and especially our faith life is not that simple. So this is kind of an ideal graph of our faith growth. So everyone probably I don't know. So, okay, some of you guys, including myself, we expect our faith grows like this. So, as we spending more time in the church and in the Bible, in our faith, so our faith can kind of grow like this. So, yeah, so this is kind of ideal graph of faith growth. But our real graph of faith growth is not like this. It's like this. So it's kind of up and down and up and down. But if we keep trying to know him, and if we keep just spending our time and life in him, then eventually we'll see that our faith is growing. But every moment, especially when you have this time around here or here or here or here, you feel like that I lose my face. I don't know where is my face. That's the what I feel, and that's what I experience. And when we kind of touch the bottom of our the kind of face growth, because our face growth is like this, up and down, up and down, up and down. But don't give up, because eventually our face will go up to be like him, right? If we are in him, if we reside and if we live in him, eventually we'll see that our face grow up. And also our life is like the elect exile, according to the First Peter. I'm sorry, it's First Peter chapter 1 verse 4, not verse chapter 4. It's chapter 1 verse 4. It said chapter 1 verse 1, I'm sorry, chapter 1 verse 1. It said that elect exile. So our life is like in exile. So there are so many temptation, and there are so many suffering that come into our life. Then we see that our face kind of going down to the bottom of our life. But that's not truth. That's not truth. So that's why we need to face our ability, and also that's why we need to face the theology of the gospel and also practice of gospel. What is the truth, and how can we live out the truth? That's the main problem of our life. That's the main and major question of our faith. How can we live out the faith, and what is the faith, and what is the truth, and how can we live out the truth? So that's really difficult, but that's also very important question of our life. And then also I have the experience of it when my faith kind of go down because there are many temptation and there are many suffering. I always have this question: is my faith true? Is my faith really based on the truth that the Bible tells? That's kind of theological question, but it's really essential. It's a really critical question of my life before, when I see the temptation or when I see the suffering. And also I have this question too: can I live as Christian? Because there are so many sufferings and so much temptation. Now how can I live as Christian in this temptation world? How can I live as his disciple? How can I live as his son and daughter? How can I live as his people in this secular world? Not easy. It's not easy. So that's why I always have this question, these two questions, the theological question and practical question. But that's not wrong, and that's not bad. That's really good and also important. That's why this letter, the first and second and third letter of John, is kind of giving the answer for that question to us. Because I believe that the original leaders, the early church Christian people, they had this question too, because in their life there are so many temptation and suffering in their life. That's why this letter of John's can be called the truth and the love. That's the nickname of this letter. Also, this is the theme of this letter, the truth and the love. Okay, let's talk about the BRI of First John first. Authorship. Okay, authorship of the First John, actually it's not easy to figure it out because there's nothing mentioned or clue for the authorship in the letter, and also there's nothing mentioned for the recipients also. So it's not usual greeting formulation of a letter. So there's no author, there's no recipient. So it's not easy to figure out who is the original readers and who is the original author, who sent their letter and who received their letter. It's kind of difficult and challenging still to figure it out. So difficult to know the author clearly. So it's really challenging. Still, among scholars, there are so much debating on this authorship. But there are two possible reasons why the author and the receiver were not recorded in this letter. First of all, maybe there is the persecution going on when this letter was written and sent to the reader. So that's the reason the persecution is going on. That's why the author need to be protected, and also the receiver, the recipients, they also need to be protected. That's why intentionally the letter didn't have that information of the author and recipients. And the other reason, possible reason, is that probably the author is very well-known person or authority. That's why the receiver, every recipient, they knew the author. So author didn't need to just explain himself or reveal himself to the recipient because they knew him very well. Also, the recipient, maybe they could be a kind of the not only specific church or specific readers, because this letter can be a circulating letter, which means the many churches just read this letter together. They just hand by hand, they just hand it out after they read it. So the many church, especially in Ephesus, in Asia Minor, there are many churches around the time. So that's why they could read this letter too. Who knows? But that could be a possible reason. Okay, let's talk about the first possible reason, the persecution. If there was persecution when this letter was sent, then suffering or persecution would be mentioned in this letter. For example, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 or chapter 3, because this letter was written around the persecution time. So there was kind of mention about the suffering or persecution. But in this letter, it's difficult to find out this kind of mention about suffering or persecution. And also, if this letter was sent and written around the time of the persecution, the author probably mentioned about the hope or encouraging, because the author tried to encourage them and give them hope in this letter and through this letter. But it seems like the theme of the letter is not like that. It's more likely the truth and love and eternal life and Jesus is Christ. That's the main theme and major theme of this letter. So it seems like this letter is now written and sent around the time of the persecution. So that's why probably the second reason could be the reason why the letter didn't mention about the author's name and the recipient's name specifically. And also, internal evidence proved that first of all, the first person singular indicate, according to the chapter 2 and chapter 5, the author is an eyewitness of Jesus Christ. And then the author is an authority of the original readers. And that's why it doesn't need to mention the name in this letter. And also the author was probably Jewish, because the author know well about laws and commandment of God. For example, chapter 1, explained about the blood cleanses sins, and also the author mentioned about the atoning sacrifice. And also the commandments was explained in this letter, and even the author mentioned about the story of Cain to the readers. So that's why author was probably Jewish. And also we can find the noticeable resemblance in vocabulary, style, and thought with the Gospel of John. So this evidence helps us to kind of think probably the author of the letter of John and also author of the Gospel of John could be same person, same author. The first example, a similar concept of a contrast. So you can have this kind of the contrast in the letter of John and in the Gospel of John. So light versus darkness, and life versus death, and truth versus lie. This contrast is kind of the how these two different books, the letter of John and the Gospel of John, use it. So it's really resemblance in vocabulary and thought. And second example is the combination of the words. In this letter and also the Gospel of John, you can find this kind of the combination of words, the spirit of truth, born of God, and children of God, and overcome the world. This kind of combination of the words are used in these two different books. Also similarity in grammatical usage and patterns of expression. So this kind of table, how these two books, letter of John, especially the first letter of John and the Gospel of John, could be same and similar. And you can see that the First John explained the word from the beginning, but also the Gospel of John explaining it from the beginning. And even the joy may be complete, and light versus darkness, and new commandment, life versus death, and truth versus lie, and we are from God. This kind of similar concept and theme could be found in these two different books, First John and the Gospel of John. So that's the reason why we can think about it. Possibly the same author wrote down this letter of John and the Gospel of John. Then this kind of the possible assumption bring us to the another question, that who is the author of the gospel? That's the another question, but this question could help us to figure out the possible author of the First John, right? Then authorship of the Gospel of John is also difficult to figure out. You will see that Jesse will explain the authorship in his teaching next week and this week, but it's not easy to figure out because there's nothing mentioned for the authorship clearly in the Gospel of John. But possibly Jewish, because knowledge about the Jewish people is explained in the Gospel of John. And also the Gospel of John, in the Gospel of John, the author explained himself or herself as the eyewitness of Jesus Christ. Okay. And three, possibly the author was a fisherman, because the author in the Gospel of John knew the sea well. Then there are four disciples who were fishermen before. Okay, so Peter and Andrew and James and John. Those four were the fishermen before. Okay, so probably among the four, probably one person could be the author of the Gospel of John. And also the author in the Gospel of John mentioned that he or she could be the John's the Baptist disciple, because in that Gospel of John the Baptist is not mentioned like the John the Baptist, only just mention John, which means that there is no two different John in the Gospel of John, only one John. Okay, and then that only one John is always John the Baptist. There is no John the Apostle, there is no John the disciple in the Gospel of John. It's very interesting, but kind of help us to figure out why the author didn't mention about John the Apostle, John the disciple. Only he mentioned John the Baptist. It's very interesting, but it helps us to figure it out. Okay, and also the author mentioned the disciple whom Jesus loved. Okay, then who is the disciple whom Jesus loved? If you read the Gospel of John, you can figure it out. The disciple whom the Jesus loved was known to the high priest. So probably there was some connection or relationship between the high priest and the disciple whom Jesus loved. Okay, and the other one of the disciples of John the Baptist before become the Jesus disciple. Okay, because the author knew the detailed information about John the Baptist, especially chapter 1. He or she, the author, explained well about the John Baptist. That's why it could be the John the Baptist disciple people. Then John the Apostle, that's why the possible author of the Gospel of John, because he was a fisherman, and the 11 disciples are mentioned in the Gospel of John except John, the son of the Zebedee. Therefore, the author of the Gospel was the John the Apostle, and also that's why the author of the First John could be the John the Apostle. Can you see this kind of connection, relationship between the authorship of the Gospel of John and the authorship of the first letter? I hope you guys understand this well. And there are external evidence too. John the Apostle was the author according to early Christian tradition. So, such as the Irenaeus or Dionysius of Alexandria and Tertullian and Eusebius, and the fragments of Papias of the Hierapolis, it kind of claimed that John the Apostle was the author of the first letter of John. Okay. Then also there are kind of the different opinion of the authorship of first letter of John. And especially they mentioned that John the Elder, because the second John and third John, it mentioned the elder. So the still many scholars assume and claim that not the John the Apostle wrote down these letters, but the John the Elder wrote down the letters, the first and second and third letters of John. And also the hypothesis, he said that there are two different John in Ephesus, John the Apostle and John the Elder. So there are two different John at Ephesus. And then they also mentioned that there are possible reasons why the elder, not the apostle John, the elder John wrote down this letter. Because John the apostle was a fisherman before, which means that he was an uneducated person. And he could not know how to write a letter or how to just kind of collect and make a sentence, because he was uneducated before. And also the first and second and third John, especially the first John of letter, is very similar with first letter. Also radical expression against the Gnosticism, you will see that one of the big argument in this letter and major theme and topic in this letter is about Gnosticism. So there are many radical expressions against the Gnosticism in this letter. Then John, the apostle, his nickname is the apostle of love. Then still some scholars say that how could John the apostle, who was the apostle of love, could use this radical expression? Because it doesn't make sense. They say that. Okay. But there's no clear evidence to support this claim. And John the Apostle had a long time preaching experience to the churches as a storyteller and communicator. It means that John the Apostle had a lot of time to train himself and learn something more and educate. Okay, so he could be become an educated person through the long time preaching experience and long time of the ministry. And also he served the ministry for a long time, so trained and educated by the Holy Spirit. This is kind of the oral tradition for the John's last words. It's according to the Hegesippus, and then his kind of information is delivered to the Jerome, and in the Jerome's commentary on Galatians chapter 6 verse 10, there are this kind of oral tradition about the Apostle John. The blessed John, the evangelist, which is the Apostle John, he lived in Ephesus until extreme old age. His disciples could barely carry him to church, and he could not muster the voice to speak many words. During individual gathering, he usually said nothing but, "Little children, love one another." That's what he always said. The disciples and brothers in attendance, annoyed because they always heard the same words, and finally said, "Teacher, the Apostle John, why do you always say this? Why do you keep saying the same thing?" And he replied with a line worthy of John, "Because it is the Lord's commandment, and if it alone is kept, it is sufficient." This is such a great words, and this really challenging my life and changing myself, because many times I forget how much this is important, to love my neighbor and to love my brother and sister. We studying the Bible and we know so much things, but many times we forget this very important commandment, very important lifestyle and practice in our life, in my life. So that's why this is really important, and this really refresh my mind why I'm studying and why I'm doing my ministry, because we need to love one another. That's the commandment of Jesus Christ, and that's what we need to do, what we have to do. Okay, anyways, that's why the possible also, I believe that John the Apostle, he is the possible author of this letter. Now, who is John the Apostle? John the Apostle, he's the youngest disciple of Jesus among the 12 disciples. So he is born around 680 and died around 180, but there's no clear evidence for it. Okay, so he was a younger son of Zebedee, according to Mark chapter 1, and also he's the older brother of James. Okay, and also he was the beloved disciple of Jesus, and he's standing beside the cross when Jesus died on the cross. And then Jesus say and ask John the Apostle, "Here is your mother." So actually Jesus asked John the Apostle to look after Mary as his mom. So John the Apostle became the son of the Mary, because Jesus asked him to look after her. Okay, and then he lived in Jerusalem until the late of 60 AD, which means before the destruction of the temple. But he moved to Ephesus and lived there until died. Then, as I explained in the teaching of Ephesus, Timothy was the minister before John moved to Ephesus. But around 68 AD, when Timothy preached the gospel in the middle of the people when the festival of Artemis happened. The people stoned him. So Timothy was executed and around that time, stoned around that time, and after Timothy died, John moved to Ephesus, and he served the church from the time. And only one disciple who died a natural death among these 12 disciples. And this is John's Basilica at Ephesus. And also, this is kind of Church of the John, but as you can see, there are 4 pillars in this basilica. And then according to the historian and the scholar, they said that these 4 pillars is representing the 4 gospel: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Anyway, that's not important, but it's very interesting. And this is the baptismal font at John's Basilica. And this could be the tomb of the John the Apostle. Okay, this is kind of the explanation and information about John the Apostle. Then, this is the next question. When was this letter written? Let's look at the internal evidence for dating. First, a written date is not mentioned in this letter. So this is still challenging. Actually, this is not easy to study the BRI of the First John because there are not usual information for authorship and recipients, and no dating and no explain about the place. So it's challenging and still controversy for dating among scholars. Difficult to know it. So all the assumption is possible by internal and external clue. Let's find and let's look at some clues. Debate for dating. There are so many kind of possible dating, and from 60 to 65 AD, or 80 to 85 AD, or 70 to 90 AD, 89 to 80, 90 to 110 AD, 85 to 95 AD, 90 to 180, or around 95 AD. There are so many possible dating for this letter. So it's really confused which is lie, because each kind of dating, the suggested dating, it seems like right? Let's look at more internal evidence for making decision. It seems like that the author was old in this letter, because the author used this kind of the expression, "my little children," fathers. And also, it seems like that there was the problem of false teaching in this letter. So many antichrist or false prophet. It's still ambiguous because this kind of information is not helpful to figure out which dating is right. So let's consider the relationship with the Gospel of John, because we believe that, at least I believe that, probably the same author wrote down these 2 different books, the first letter of John and the Gospel of John. Let's look at it. Notice resemblance with the first Gospel, the Gospel of John. So I already explained it. So this the Gospel of John probably is written after. So there are kind of the 3 possible chance for debating. So first of all, the first letter of John could be written after the Gospel of John, or written before the Gospel of John, or could be written the similar time. Okay, there are kind of the debating and then suggestion, but it's still not easy to figure out which dating is more possible. Okay, so let's look at more internal evidence. As we see that in this letter, first letter of John, there is the theme to kind of fight against the false teaching and false prophets. Then who were the Antichrist and false prophet that this letter mentioned? It seems like the enemies who oppose the gospel of Jesus Christ are the false prophet and the Antichrist. Then who were the enemy who opposed the gospel of Jesus? Jewish or Greek philosophers or heresy, especially the proto-Gnosticism? But not sure, not clear evidence found in this letter. Now, according to the extant evidence, the late of the 1st century AD, and then early Christian tradition described Quirinius as an opponent of John the Apostle. Okay, so according to the external evidence, it said that this letter and also Gospel of John is written to defend the Gospel of John and Gospel of Jesus. Okay, because the Quirinius, who was the Gnosticist, because he just lived in Ephesus and he preached and then delivered the false message to the people, including church. That's why the John the Apostle tried to defend the gospel of Jesus Christ from the heresy. And Quirinius was an active proto-Gnosticist around the late 1st century AD. And this is another things to figure out and help us to know the dating. Then, because as I mentioned that it seems like there was no persecution when this letter was written and sent. And then, as we know, there are two big and great persecution, at least one great persecution against Christian, the Nero Emperor. Christian persecution of Nero Emperor is very well known and kind of well known, but no mention of a persecution in this letter. So it means that before 6480 or after 6880, because Nero was died 6880. But John the Apostle was not the old at the time, the 6880, 6480 or 6880, but at least not like the 64 before 6480, but at least after 6880. Okay, and another possible persecution against Christian. Some of you guys listened the lecture of the Revelation by Brian last week, but he said that probably there was no persecution of the Domitians against Christian. But still, some scholar and some historians say that there was the possible persecution of Domitian Emperor against Christian. So Tertullian and Irenaeus and Eusebius, they claim that there was the persecution of Domitian Emperor against Christian. And according to the tradition, especially the Tertullian said, Domitian Emperor tried to kill John because he refused the emperor worship. So John was thrown into the boiling pot of oil, but he didn't die. And John also drank a cup of poison wine, but he didn't die. Okay. But there is no mention about the persecution in this letter. So it means that before 9080 or after 9680. So according to this kind of the internal and external evidence, what he searched together, there is a suggestion for possible dating. First of all, John was old when the letter was written because he used the expressions such as my little children and fathers, kind of that. So probably the author, the John the Apostle, was old. And there is no mention about the persecution. And so after 6080 or before 9080 or after 9680 9680. But tradition says that letter was written around the 1st century AD because the Canticles appeared after 8880 at Ephesus. So Aeneas, because the Canticles, Aeneas after 8880, this letter was written and sent. And John the Apostle died around 180 according to the tradition. So this is the timetable kind of suggest for possible dating. Between 8880 to 9880, at the time, Gnosticism was not that popular. So even the Corinthians moved to Ephesus around 8880. He was not well-known kind of philosopher or teacher for the people in Ephesus. So it was not that popular. But between 90 and 1960-80, persecution probably happened, but it's still debating. But if the Domitian persecution happened, but then this letter didn't mention about the persecution in the letter, so probably not the time. And then after 9680 and around the 180, because John the Apostle probably died around the time. Then another question is kind of that John the Apostle at the time was too old to write and send this letter. But still, in these three kind of the options and suggestion, for me, it seems like that the third one is more possible dating. Someone can say that the 90s in 9680 can be the possible option. It's up to you. You can do it. You can choose it. But for me, 96 to 180 is more possible dating for this letter. And how to overcome the difficulty, because John the Apostle was too old after 96-80, and how can he write this letter? Then, first possible option to overcome this difficulty, God provides the power. Yeah, God can do everything, and God can help him to write down. And yeah, because the heresy, the Gnosticism was really growing, and it's really attacking the church. So John, who was the authority of the church in Ephesus and Asia Minor, he need to write this letter for protecting the gospel and the church. So the Holy Spirit can help him to write this letter. And the other option, he was a healthy man biologically. He is very healthy man, John the Apostle. So he could do it. And this is my kind of the one example. I found this from my country, Korea. His name is Yu Yang-seok, and he is 92 years old, but he is currently active dentist. He's very healthy man, still read and still write and still work and still drive well by himself. He is biologically and naturally very healthy man. So John the Apostle could be the same person, biologically, naturally healthy man. Who knew it? But it could be, right? And the other option, there's someone who can just write down when John the Apostle spoke, because he didn't have the power. If he didn't have the power to write down something, he could speak, and then the other person can write down it. Amanuensis, right? Anyway, so this is the kind of possible option to overcome difficulty. So possible written time. There is the Nero's persecution, and John moved to the Ephesus, and temple burn, and Domitian persecution, probably or probably not, but who knows it. But many still eyewitness and history, and they say that, so probably Domitian's persecution. And John maybe died around this time. And Carinthius, who is the early Gnostic, he moved to Ephesus after 80. So probably around this time, 96 to 180, this letter was written. Okay. So the revelation was written first, and the letter and the gospel could be written, maybe written similar time because of similar theme, but still it's not easy to know clearly, still debating. So I don't say that this is 100% right. I don't say that. It's up to you, but this is kind of possible answer for the dating because it makes sense, right? Okay, where was it written? According to the internal evidence for the place, there is no place. It's mentioned in this letter, so still it's difficult. The authorship and the dating are not mentioned, and we don't know who is the response clearly. So difficult to know it exactly. So we need to consider external evidence. Assumption for the written place. The possible author, John the Apostle. We researched it, right? We saw that the evidence, how it claimed that John the Apostle could be the author of this letter. And the possible dating, what I believe, is around 9060 AD, before he died. So 96 to 180. Then the question we need to have, where did John the Apostle live around this time, 96 AD? According to the external evidence, John the Apostle moved to Ephesus, I explained already, before the destruction of the temple, and he supported by the early tradition of the church. He moved it. Also, many historians, Eusebius and Irenaeus, they say that John moved to Ephesus. And also Carinthius, who was the enemy of John, the gospel, as an active Gnostic, lived in Ephesus. So probably this letter was written at Ephesus. That's the place. That's why we can know the original reader, because this letter was written at Ephesus and written around 9060 AD and written by John. We can now know who can be the original reader of this letter. But still, there's no specific information in this letter to know the original reader, because not usual style of the letter. So that's why we need to study more about internal evidence for the original readers. First of all, the Christian could be the original reader of this letter, because in the letter, chapter 2, he explained that you are forgiven on account of his name. So the Christian people can be the leaders. And then also explain the brothers and sisters this letter mentioned. So that's why the Christian people, they can be the reader of this letter. And possibly not the new believers. The original leaders, it looks like they just became Christian, because he said that have conquered them, they went out from us. This explanation and in the letter seems like the reader was kind of struggling for their faith and their dedication to Jesus Christ at the time. So it seems like they are kind of the rookie or newbie of the Christian. They just became Christian. Now also it seems like the Jewish people could be the reader of this letter, because they knew the law of the Jewish and the sacrifice of Jews. Okay, and even the story of Cain, they knew it. That's why John the Apostle used this story and law and sacrifice of Jewish people to them. And it seems like the original leader was under the authority of the author, because the author used this expression, my children and fathers. So John the Apostle was a minister for the church at Ephesus in Asia Minor, according to the main historian. And by tradition, John lived to old age in Ephesus, where he preached love and fought heresy, especially the teaching of Cantus. So Ephesus and Asia Minor, all the ministry area of the John the Apostle. So that's why I believe that this letter probably was the circulating letter for the Christian people who live in Asia Minor and Ephesus. So who was the original leader? Jewish Christians, and they lived in Ephesus and Asia Minor, and they lived in the late 4th century, especially around 1960-80. Okay. And if that's the true, the original leader, they lived around 1960-80, and they live in Ephesus and they just became Christian. If that's true, then it means that they just survive from the persecution. Some people, they just survive from the persecution of Nero, and some Christians, they survive from the persecution of Domitian. So it means that physically, emotionally, they exhausted, and they could have the doubt for their faith. They can say that, why we keep under the persecution, why are persecuted, why we are suffered, if our faith is truth, and if we believe that Jesus is King and He's the Lord of the world, then why we are persecuted and why you are suffered? They could have that kind of question. And also they are under attack from the Gnostics, especially the Cantus. So because of this attack of the heresy, the original leaders, they could have this doubt about the salvation, eternal life, doubt about the Jesus is Christ, the truth. Which one is the truth? What is the truth? Jesus is truth, or the teaching of Cantus is truth? Which is truth? They could be confused and they could be doubt because this attack of the Gnostics. That's why in the church there could be division and mistrust is going on. So to understand this letter, the 1st John, well, we have to know who the Cantus was, because according to the historian and church tradition, they said that the Cantus was the opponent and the enemy of John the Apostle, enemy of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So it's really important to know who the Cantus was, because it will help us to why author had to write down this letter. Cantus, he was a proto-Gnostic teacher around 180, but he appeared around 80. But he lived in Ephesus, and he just walked around Asia Minor as John did it, because they kind of fought each other, and then they are kind of the opponent each other. And a contemporary rival of the Apostle John by early church tradition, such as the Irenaeus. So John wrote the gospel and the letters to defend the faith from the false teaching of Cantus. This is kind of the church tradition and story about Cantus and John, how their relationship is kind of very serious. This story. When the Apostle John went to the baths at Ephesus, upon learning that Cantus was there, and John the Apostle, he fled for fear, because that the baths should fall to pieces because of the Cantus, because he is the enemy of the truth. So this is kind of simple story, but this shows us how their relationship was like that. Quintus, he followed the Jewish laws, partially adhered to Judaism, and he had an edited version of Matthew's Gospel because he argued that Christians should keep the law. And he believed that the law and the prophets were both given by angels. And then he believed that the angels was the creator of the world, not God created the world. Angels create the world. He believed it, Quintus. And then his teaching reflected of syncretism of Gnosticism, Judaism, and Christianity. Everything is kind of mixed and is stick together and synchronized together. And what did Quintus teach mainly? According to Irenaeus and Hippolytus and Tertullian, the world was made by a less divine being who was ignorant of the Supreme God. That's what he taught. Also, he rejected the virgin birth of Jesus. The Quintus said that Jesus was the genetic offspring of Joseph and Mary, not by the Holy Spirit. The Quintus teach it. Then the Christ Spirit, at the command of the Supreme God, entered Jesus in the form of a dove at his baptism. That's what Quintus taught, mainly. Also, due to the baptism, Jesus performed miracles because as you can see that the Christ Spirit, it came into Jesus, the physical body of Jesus. That's why that Jesus started to perform miracles and taught about the previously unknown Supreme God. And the Christ Spirit left Jesus at the crucifixion because it is incapable of experiencing suffering or pain. That's really ridiculous and interesting, but that's what Quintus taught. The law was created by the Jewish God, who was a lesser divine being. And after the resurrection of the dead, the kingdom of Christ will be established on earth in Jerusalem. That's what Quintus taught. And in the New Jerusalem, people will have the bodies and engage in all forms of physical pleasures. And this kingdom will last 10,000 years, 1,000 years. That's what mainly the Quintus taught the people. And the people believe it. Wow. And this kind of the beginning point and how Quintus build up the Gnosticism at the time. So mainly he taught that Jesus is not the Son of God. And it is the reason why John the Apostle tried to defend the gospel and Jesus Christ in this letter. He said that God abides in those who confess that Jesus is the Son of God, and they abide in God. And even in the Gospel of John, he taught that, John the Apostle, I myself have seen and have testified that this is the Son of God. That Jesus is the real, and that he is the Son of God, not just physical body of human being. Jesus is the Son of God. He keeps saying that. Okay? That's what John the Apostle tried to do it through this letter. And then now we need to talk about the BRI of the 2nd and 3rd John, but it will be short because we can see that there are kind of the relationship between the 1st John and 2nd and 3rd John. There is the relationship. And so it's not that wrong. It'll be short. It seems like the same author and same written time for 2nd and 3rd John first. Same writer, because he explained the elder and the similar style of the letter. I hope to come to you, 2nd John and 3rd John. We found that expression and style. So use the familiar Greek terminology in the letters, 2nd and 3rd John. Then, as we see that in the 2nd and 3rd letters, the author introduced himself or herself as the elder. Then elder could refer to age, according to Luke and 1st Tim, or it could refer to authority. Okay? In the letter, the author well known to the oral and write with a clear sense of authority. 2nd John, you can see it. And John the Apostle was elder and minister to the churches at Ephesus and Asia Minor until he died around 180. Okay? And the relationship between 1st John and 2nd and 3rd John. Similar message between 1st and 2nd. This is the table, how it looks like the same or similar. So because the message, no new commandment, but an old commandment, love one another, our joy be complete, false prophet, antichrist. Because this kind of the message is very same and similar, you can see that there is the kind of the relationship between 1st John and 2nd and 3rd John. And the grammar and style and vocabulary of 2nd John compare very closely to 1st John. 8 of the 13 verses in 2nd John are almost identical with many verses in 1st John. Also, the church tradition is said that all the letters of John was written by John the Apostle. The same author, that's why John the Apostle, similar style, vocabulary, theme. And the same time between 96 and 180. Because there's no clue of persecution, and the elder means old, because John the Apostle at the time, he was very old. And that's why it could be written in the same place, Ephesus. John was an elder and authority for the church in Ephesus and Asia Minor at the time. So the order of the John's letter, 1st John, not specific, possibly the circulating letters of the Christian people at Ephesus and Asia Minor. And 2nd John, in the 2nd John we can find it, the leaders are the elect lady and her children. Now who are they? It's the kind of question. And 3rd John, the Gaius is the reader of the letter. For this question, there are many kind of the assumption and suggestion for identifying the elect lady and her children, but it seems like they're Christian people. The elect lady, maybe church leaders and church leaderships, and her children is the people in the church, or elect lady mentioned and means a church, and her children is congregation. But whatever it is, it seems like it mentioned about Christian. Okay. And a brief summary about the background of Ephesus. Its polity and culture. It's under the Rome imperial code and influence of the Rome culture and crucial city, because Ephesus is crucial city. So I highly recommend you guys to watch the my lecture video of the Ephesus, the Ephesians, because I explained already about the Ephesus, and then it could help you to understand the background of the Ephesus. And economy and religion, popular and busy city because it's crossway and nearby fort. And Artemis is the protect god of the Ephesus. It's really popular in Roman Empire. And also in that city of Ephesus, there are Greek philosophers and Gnostics. That's the background of the Ephesus, brief background. And possible question for the OR. Is my truth? What about Gnosticism? Well, what about Docetism? Can I live as Christian in this world, in this confusion? Then how? How do we resolve the problem of division? Because the people, they left the church and they just mistrust each other, and how can he resolve this problem? That could be the possible question of the all at the time. So this is a kind of BRI of the First John and Second and Third John. I hope you guys learn something from this kind of short lecture. And then it's already past the 1 hour and 10 minutes, so I'm gonna just close this lecture. But I want to make another lecture for the Gnosticism and Docetism, because if you really want to understand this letter of the John, you need to have the brief understanding of the Gnosticism and Docetism. So that's why I will make another video for the Gnosticism and Docetism. I hope you guys can learn something from the video too. But now I'm gonna just close this video lecture because the time matter. And then if you already know the Gnosticism and Docetism well, you don't need to watch that video. And this video will explain you BRI, and that's all you need to do. And as I close this time, I hope you guys really have finished this journey of SBS strongly. Yeah, again, you only have just 2 more the classes to finish this journey, and yeah, you're almost there. Don't give up. And one more thing, that's not the finish of your studying the Bible. That's the beginning. That's the beginning. Especially in this season, the pandemic, really difficult season for everyone in the world. Well, what can he do? What can I do in this season? It's really difficult to know and figure out the future. We cannot see anything in this future, but at least we can see and we can depend on God in this pandemic, because the Bible, His word, is the light of our feet. So His word and His voice will guide and lead us in the middle of the pandemic. So let's rely on Him as we study His word, and let's depend on Him as we teach His Bible, His words to the people. Everyone in this world needs this truth and the love. How can you know the truth? And how can you love Him? We can do it. So as this letter explains and teaches us, let's do it. Let's preach and teach the truth, and let's love each other. And teaching the truth and loving another, that's what we Christians need to do in this pandemic. Let's do it. Thank you for watching the video in this lecture. It is clumsy, and even I used many broken English. I hope you guys understand, and then you guys gain something in this lecture. Thank you guys again, and have a great day. Thank you. Bye.